Unable to find anything better, I settle in at Bud's place. I'm not technically fired, but I'm certainly not welcome in the office. Bill needed to get back to his office after our meeting with Susie and Vicky. He said it would be hard to get through most of today, but to contact Janine and let her know of any new developments. According to Tracy, Bud is somewhere in Houston right now, checking out a hunch. I wish he would wait so I could go with him, but Tracy said he left first thing this morning. The worst part is that I feel like my life is falling apart and there is nothing I can do to stop it. I know I have good people working for me, but I've always been a person who rolls up my sleeves and gets my hands dirty. This waiting was driving me crazy. Even the report Tracy handed me from Bud did little to ease my frustration, as the audio and videotapes from my house last night revealed nothing significant. It's been a hell of a day, and it's barely noon now. In some ways, today is worse than yesterday. Yesterday at least I was doing something, albeit flailing around like a chicken with its head cut off. I'm finding that my attitude towards Susie and marriage is slowly changing. It's getting harder and harder for me to see how I'm going to get over it. I'm already having a hard time getting over her betrayal on Friday night. Now I'm beginning to suspect that she may be part of this setup. If I find out she's involved, I'm in for one hell of a payback. I think back to this morning's meeting. As we were leaving, I asked Bill about the stunt he pulled at the end of the meeting. In a way, he pissed me off. Actually, it's more than that. I'm not angry, I'm jealous. He got to her. He waited 10 years, but he finally got his chance. From the way I feel right now, I don't want to wait that long. A knock on the door startles me a little, and I look up from the office I've borrowed from Bud to see Tracy walking in. "Bud's on the phone for you," she says. "Bud," I say into the receiver, picking up the phone. Tracy smiles at me and leans over the desk. For a moment, I get a heavenly view of Tracy's blouse. Tracy gives me a mischievous smile, knowing exactly where my gaze is going. She presses the lighted button on the front of the phone, and suddenly I hear the sound of Bud talking to someone. Tracy presses the hands-free button, and Bud's voice comes out of the speaker. "Bud?" repeat I. "What the hell took you so long? Tracy had to give you lessons on how to use the phone? If you only knew how close you were to the truth." I laugh. Tracy smiles at me and finally straightens up and walks back to her desk, but not before wiggling her hips a little exaggeratedly on her way out. "I wish I could go in there with you, Bud." "Yeah, sure, but you'd only slow me down. We've dug up a few things here, and very important ones at that. But before I dump them on you, I want to wait until I get things straightened out. Do you think you can set up a meeting between us and Benner for tomorrow morning?" "Tomorrow morning, Bud, that's going to be a little difficult. I have a meeting at the firm where I have to give them my answer. Bill and I barely had time to study the package they offered, so we set the meeting for tomorrow morning." "Damn," Bud grumbled. "Well, you need to hear what I've dug up before you meet with them, and especially before you meet with your wife and her lawyer. Can you tell me what you've been able to find out so far?" I don't want to be cryptic, but I don't have everything set up yet, and it's best to keep things quiet until I know for sure. So we need to meet tonight. You need to set a time when the three of us can talk, and it needs to be late because you're going to be really busy the rest of the day. I need you to fly to Houston right away." "Pronto? You mean right now?" "The sooner the better. But before that, set up the damn meeting." "Okay, I'll do it here. I'll have Tracy find me a flight while I try to set up a meeting for tonight. Do you think 9 o'clock is late enough? And where can I meet you when I get there?" "I think not until 9 o'clock. And no, you won't be meeting me here in Houston. On second thought, it would be better to do it later, say 10 o'clock at night. Make an appointment at my office in Dallas. While you're in Houston, you'll have a little work to do. We have a background on your secretary. She's really here, if you can believe it." "You're kidding me." "No. And I know you need to communicate with her, so write down the address and get your ass over here." I scribble furiously as Bud gives me the address of the apartment. He once again reminds me to make an appointment for tonight, and we hang up. I call the number I have for Janine first, getting up and walking over to Tracy's desk in the reception area. Janine answers on the first ring, and I quickly bring her up to speed on the search for Heidi. Just as quickly, she tells me that there's no way in hell I can talk to Heidi alone. She tells me to book her a plane ticket along with my own, and that she will meet me at the airport. I give Tracy my American Express card and ask her to perform magic at the airport for two. I tell her to find the first flight to Houston and find a return flight that lands at Love Field around 9 p.m. While Tracy starts pounding away on the keyboard, I go back to my temporary office, pack up all my stuff, and get ready to head to the airport. Tracy is just finishing booking the tickets when I return to her desk. I smack her on the cheek as she hands me 2 e-tickets and an itinerary. I quickly call Janine, giving her the flight information and telling her exactly where I'll meet her at the airport. We'll both have to hurry to make it on time. Just as I hang up the phone, I remember that Bud asked me twice to remember. Barely catching Janine on the phone a second time, I tell her that we need to set up a meeting for Bill tonight and ask if she can't make the appointment until 10 o'clock since our flight doesn't arrive until 9 p.m. She says she'll find someone to set it up. Tuesday, 3:49 p.m., Houston. Now remember Janine, I say softly as we walk up the stairs. She's rather shy. I'll introduce you and explain why you're here. Just smile and nod, okay? She looks at me, smiles and nods. I get a laugh, one of the few times in the last 4 or 5 days. Smiling, I look around the building that Bud says Heidi lives in now. I shake my head and hope it's something very temporary for both of us. There was no security on the front door, so we just walked in and up the stairs to the second floor. The hallway at least was clean, though dimly lit. We walk down the hallway and soon find ourselves in front of office 211B. With a nervous sigh and a glance at Janine, I knock on the door. At first I hear nothing, but then I catch the slight sound of approaching footsteps. I see the peephole in the door being covered and hear an "oh my god" on the other side of the door. The door chain rattles, and 2 deadbolts later, the door swings open, revealing a very surprised Heidi. After the last few days, I don't know what to make of Heidi. I watch her eyes water, and suddenly she steps over the threshold and surprises me with a very strong hug. As she pulls away, she blushes and a little of the old Heidi comes out in her. She smiles shyly at me and only then notices my coworker. "I can't believe you're here, Mr. Vickers. I don't even know how you found me, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised," she says, keeping her eyes on Janine. I watch as she considers the tight blouse and skirt that Janine seems to favor. "Mr. Vickers?" she asks in a veiled and slightly disapproving tone. "Heidi, you've been calling me Jake for 10 years now. I see no reason why you should change now." A smile touches her lips faintly, but she casts a wary, suspicious glance at Janine. Suddenly, I realize that if my assumptions are correct, Heidi has no idea what's going on in Dallas, and she's wondering why I'm here, next to Janine. "Janine, this is Heidi Bevis, my administrative assistant, but really my right hand and conscience. Heidi, this is Janine Prescott. She's a paralegal." I think about explaining more, but at this point, less is better. Heidi looks at both of us confused, then awkwardly steps back and invites us in. "And I've been to Heidi's house in Dallas a few times to help her with repairs and other such things. I know that most of her family lives here in Houston. In fact, my previous ill-fated trip included a stay in Houston, and that was one of the reasons Heidi accompanied me on this trip." Heidi ushers us into a small living room and offers us a seat, asking if we would like something to drink. We both politely decline. "You're hard to figure out, Heidi," I tease her. She looks confused and then puzzled. "I'm sorry I left so soon. I wanted to stay long enough to make sure they replaced me with someone good enough for you, but they told me not to worry about that and that it was more important that I come here to Houston to help my brother." I realized that Heidi must have just answered a few riddles, but I didn't know which ones yet. "Heidi, are you okay?" I asked sincerely. "Are you in trouble?" She looks puzzled again. "Yeah, I'm fine. I was more worried about you. I tried to call you this morning, but no one was picking up. Then I tried to call Mr. Weston, but they told me he wasn't available. So I called the front desk and asked for you, but they said you weren't working there anymore." Mr. Vickers, are you in trouble? I was told it was just routine. You didn't get fired because of me, did you? She asks, casting another suspicious glance at Janine, who has now taken the chair across from me. Despite the seriousness of my situation, I can't help but notice the long leg exposed from beneath her short skirt. I have to force myself to focus on Heidi. Suddenly, I find myself in one of those situations where I don't even know what to do. I glance over to Janine, but she shrugs indifferently. Finally, I ask, Heidi, just tell me what's going on. Janine and I came all this way to find you and make sure you were okay. Heidi looks at me bewildered. She throws another angry glance at Janine, who only smiles back. Didn't Miss Hinckley tell you what happened? She promised to explain why I had to run away from you. No, sit down and tell me about it. That's awful, Jake. I mean, I knew it was coming, of course, but it's still awful. Just calm down and tell me about it. That's my brother Bumper. The one who keeps getting in trouble? Yeah, the one. Jake did good this time. He got caught buying drugs, and this is the third time. The DA told him he's going to jail. You know Bumper wouldn't hurt a fly. Can you imagine what those hardened criminals will do to him if he goes to jail? When did all this happen? I ask anxiously. Last week, Heidi snorted. Right after you left Houston? Yes. Why didn't you call me and tell me? She looks at me puzzled again. I didn't call you because I knew you were working in San Antonio. I can't interrupt your day with my little emergencies with Jake. As your boss or as your friend, I guess you had to. So how are things going now? What can I do to help? Jake, says Heidi, genuinely perplexed. What? Well, don't you already know? Know what? I reply, equally puzzled. My attention is momentarily distracted by the sight of Janine spreading her legs and leaving them slightly spread, like a scene from Basic Instinct. I can't tell if she's dressed. Oh, my brother, silly girl. You sent Miss Hinckley here to help me, she says with some frustration, shifting my attention from Janine's belly button to Heidi's face. A quick peripheral glance at Janine's smirking face confirms my suspicions of multiple games. Miss Hinckley showed up, didn't she? I continue. Did she help you? She didn't call you back? For a moment, I think about playing along and seeing how it ends. Then I shake my head to stop thinking about such nonsense and choose what works best for me. Heidi, I didn't send Miss Hinckley here. So why don't you tell me what happened? Heidi looks at me in surprise and slowly sits up. I cast a glance at Janine, and it's a mistake because now she's spread her knees another inch or two, confirming that there's nothing under her skirt and that she has a very trusting relationship with the razor. I clear my throat and force myself to look at Heidi again. I thought she came to my house in Dallas because you sent her. I'm pretty sure that's what she said. Why don't you tell me what happened, Heidi? I repeat firmly. Over the next 20 minutes, Heidi tells me pretty much everything about Hinckley's visit to her. Heidi found out about her brother on Monday while at work. She immediately went to Tom Weston, my boss, to request a family leave of absence. Tom, of course, granted her request, and Heidi made arrangements to go to Houston on Tuesday night. Heidi said that while she was packing and making other last-minute arrangements, her doorbell rang, and she was shocked to see Miss Hinckley, the executive director of Human Resources, on the doorstep. Heidi invited her in, and Hinckley began to sympathize with Heidi about her brother, saying that she too had a younger brother who had fallen into the ugly underbelly of drugs. As Heidi explained to me, Hinckley apparently has relatives in both the Houston Police Department and the prosecutor's office. She offered to make some calls and intercede on Heidi's behalf. Hinckley suggested that she might be able to get Heidi's brother placed in a rehabilitation center instead of jail time. I interrupt Heidi for a moment and ask if she has any idea how Hinckley might have found out about Bumper. Heidi looks at me puzzled again for a moment and says that Mr. Weston must have told her. Out of the corner of my eye, I notice Janine writing something down on her little PDA and realize she's making sure we follow up on the developments. I turn to Heidi and ask her to continue the story. Heidi was understandably excited about any chance of her brother not going to jail. She enthusiastically agreed to Hinckley's plan. Hinckley proved true to his word, and her brother was indeed sent to a rehab center. Heidi had been in Houston since last Tuesday and planned to move here permanently so she could continue to help her brother. She had already contacted a real estate agent to sell her apartment in Dallas. I knew Heidi's parents were divorced, her father's whereabouts were unknown, and her mother could usually be caught socializing with a bottle of vodka. So, everything seems to be okay? I asked a little suspiciously. Thinking about how close Hinckley and Schmidt were, I suddenly remember the old saying about Greeks and gifts. As good as it gets. If the world were perfect, my brother wouldn't be on drugs. But the center he's been sent to seems very promising. I have hope that he'll be able to quit. I smile, genuinely happy for her. In the time I've known her, she's been through several depths of hell for her brother, for her entire family. For a moment, I decide whether to bring up the affidavit. Heidi has enough turmoil in her life as it is. So you got a partner? Asks Heidi unexpectedly, bringing my thoughts back to the topic at hand. No, Heidi, I reply. Anything but, I think to myself. It wasn't, replies Heidi in surprise. You have nothing to worry about, Heidi. Everything will work itself out when the time comes. But Miss Hinckley said it had already been decided when I saw her last Tuesday, continues Heidi. Said? I reply surprised, making another mistake and glaring at Janine. Yes, Jake, Heidi replies. She even made me sign a statement about how much you've done for the company. Made you? I repeat with even more surprise. With an effort, I turn my head back to Heidi. Did you sign the affidavit? No, it wasn't an affidavit. I've worked for you for enough years to know the difference. It was just a progress report. She had me sign the second page and autograph both pages. It was 2 pages? And you said it was brilliant? I ask. Yes. Well, the first page was glossy. The second page said something about your leadership skills and that it was an area for improvement. I asked Miss Hinckley about it and she said that all the performance reports were like that. They had to write something not very positive, no matter how well someone was performing. I stared at Heidi for a second, trying to comprehend what she was telling me. They copied Heidi's signature? I reached into the briefcase I'd brought with me and pulled out a manila folder that contained a copy of the affidavit. Carefully retrieving it and folding it to the second page, I held it out to Heidi. Heidi, is this the second page you're talking about? Heidi squints for a moment, then quickly reads the single paragraph. Yeah, I think that's exactly what I signed last week. But I don't understand all this notary stuff. There was no notary here last week. It was just me and Miss Hinckley. Before I can stop her, Heidi turns the first page. I get up to try to take the document from her before she can read it. Unfortunately, Heidi is a fast reader, and in the first couple seconds, she manages to read enough to stand up and turn away from me so I can't take the document from her hands. Oh my God, she exclaimed. Sighing, I sit down and let her read the entire affidavit. I glance over at Janine, who is now sitting demurely, cross-legged, and watching Heidi and I interact with interest. Heidi slowly sits down in the nearest chair. I watch as she slowly turns crimson, whispering the phrase, "Oh my God," repeatedly. She finishes reading the first page and flips to the second page, as if expecting the second page to say something completely different. For a long moment, she stares at the document. How? Why? Jake, she stammers. Calm down, I tell her. I had the exact same feeling the first time I saw her. What does that mean, Jake? She asks. It says, well, it accuses you, us, of having an affair. It says that you made me do this thing with you, that you made me do things like, you know, you know. Heidi buries her face in her palms and starts sobbing. I start to get up and walk over to her, but Janine reminds me to be careful. Heidi, I have to ask you a question that I already know the answer to. I knew the answer before I even got here, but I have to ask it anyway. Did you sign that affidavit? No, she states emphatically. I signed your performance evaluation. You didn't sign that document? I repeat. No. But the second page, does it look familiar? Is it the page you signed? But the first page is different? No, I mean yes. The second page is the same. The first page is a lie. A page of disgusting lies. I would never do anything like that. We would never do anything like that. And you would never do that to Susie. Heidi, will you sign a legal affidavit that you did not sign this document as it is now drafted? Definitely, she says, and anger creeps into her voice. What does all this mean, Jake? Are you in trouble, Jake? Am I in trouble? Is Miss Hinckley behind all this? What does this mean for my brother? Oh my God, what does it all mean? It's going to be okay, Heidi, I soothe. Don't worry. You didn't do anything wrong or get in trouble. The important thing is that you stay here in Houston and take care of your family and your brother. Okay? Don't worry about anything else. I'll take care of it, okay? Just keep me posted on what's going on in your life. Heidi snorted and nodded. But what about you, Jake? We're talking about that you forced yourself on me. I smile to allay her fears. You don't have to worry about me, Heidi. Those who know me well know the truth, and your signature on the affidavit will help eliminate any other problems. And Susie? Does she know about this? She asks. I just nod. Oh my God, how is she feeling? It must be awful. She doesn't think you and I did anything? Susie's struggling a bit with the enormity of it all, but you don't worry. I know she thinks as warmly of you as she did before all this came to light. So don't worry about a thing. Surely she can't seriously think you and I did anything. It's only one page, and that one is obviously fake. The problem is that you're so honest. Your signature on that first document, even if it was forged, carries a lot of weight. Plus, I stop myself. Heidi looks at me. Jake, what? I sigh. There are pictures. Pictures? How can there be pictures? We've never been together. I shrug. You have them? I raise my eyes to Janine. She smiles and shrugs. They're really upsetting Heidi, I don't think. She suddenly stands up. I don't care what you think, Jake Vickers. I have a right to see those pictures. I sigh, reaching into my briefcase and pulling out another manila folder. You better sit down, Heidi. Heidi slowly sits down, not taking her eyes off the folder. When she is fully seated, I hand her the folder. She takes one last look at me and opens the folder. Oh my God, she mutters, and I watch her turn crimson. She studies each photo, repeating, oh my God, each time and getting more and more crimson as she examines each of the 8 photos. When she's finished, she tucks all the glossy 8 by 10-inch pictures back into the folder and returns it to me. I realize how people can be fooled by these pictures, Heidi finally says. She looks up at me. But that's not us. That's not me. I don't have a tattoo. Tattoos? I exclaim. I open the folder and start looking through the photos. Look at the last picture, Heidi says quietly. I move to the last picture. I look through every inch of it, but I don't see anything. I'm about to ask Heidi where she saw the tattoo when suddenly I notice it. Above the sheet, you can barely see the outline of some kind of tattoo. Wow, I muttered to myself. This could be important. You won't mind if we include a statement in the affidavit that you don't have a tattoo? Heidi nods her head. Janine quickly drafts the affidavit using a program on her laptop and prints it out on a small but equally efficient portable printer. Being a notary public, she can also notarize the document. It seems unbelievable, but in just a few short hours, we've managed to identify a lot of suspicious activity and cast doubt on the idea that Heidi and I were in that bed. I get up to leave. I walk over to Heidi and give her a hug. Heidi hugs me back. I'm sorry, Jake, she says. I'm sorry too, Heidi, I reply. I hug her one last time, and then Janine and I walk Heidi to the door. I wish her well and remind her to call me if she has any difficulties. Upon reflection, I tell her that I expect at least a couple calls a week, regardless of how things are going. She nods, snorting, and Janine and I close the door behind us. All the way to the car, Janine and I are silent. We fasten our seatbelts and get out of Heidi's car. I shake my head as we drive through the streets surrounding the airport terminals. Pulling up to the departure terminal, I pull up to the curb and put the car in park. Why don't you go ahead and check in, and I'll return the car and catch up with you later? She looks at me in confusion. I could ride with you to the rental place? We both don't need to haggle over a car or shuttle. Besides, you have a big bag with all your gear. You go ahead and I'll catch up with you. She looks at me for a moment and shrugs. I think she's just realized that all of our games have come to their logical conclusion. She makes a move to open the car door, but then stops and turns to me. You don't trust me, Jake? I turn and look straight into her eyes. Nonchalantly and without a shadow of sarcasm, I feel my life. She laughs and opens the car door and gets out, looking back out the window. Jake, you still have a lot to learn. I watch her walk into the terminal. Not likely, I think to myself. And I'm glad there are things I still have yet to learn. Not that I want to learn it, especially from you. Tuesday, 9:48 p.m. Janine and I head back to Dallas-Fort Worth and immediately split up. I'm thankful that the flight from Houston was short, as barely a dozen words were spoken between us. I'm guessing she didn't like the way I blew her off in the terminal. I have a feeling few men have done that to her. I pick up my car from the short-term parking lot and head to Bud's office, where Bill and I will meet with him to discuss the latest discoveries and think about strategy. As I pull up to Bud's office, I notice that Bill's car is already parked. I walk in and am surprised to see that Tracy is still there. Have you been here all day? No, I left this afternoon because I knew I'd have to open again today. Bud isn't here yet, but he called about 10 minutes ago and said he just pulled off the interstate and would be here soon. And here's your lawyer already here. He nods toward the conference room. I start to turn toward the conference room when the office door suddenly swings open and Bud walks into the office with a huge grin. Thanks, Tracy, he says to her first. Why don't you go home and tell your husband that I'll make it up to him for making you come here so late? Tracy smiles and picks up her purse to leave. The poor girl kept the establishment open for us, waiting for her boss to return. I promise to make it up to her. She says, You sure will. Bud asks her if my lawyer is there and, when she nods, asks her to wait a minute and let him set the two of us up in his office. She tells him she's already sent my lawyer to the conference room. He nods in acknowledgement. Bud and I enter the conference room, and I introduce Bud to Bill. He asks us to make ourselves comfortable while he checks the results of some other parts of the investigation. Through the half-open door, we hear him talking to Tracy for a few minutes, and then he tells her thanks for staying and asks her to go home. He disappears for a couple minutes and finally bursts into the conference room. Sorry to keep you both waiting, Bud says, walking around our chairs and moving to the other end of the table. I wanted to get the latest reports from Tracy and my staff, he explains, settling into his chair. Bud glances at my face and grins. I'm sorry, he says. I know it's not funny, but you look like you're about to explode. So let's get started, shall we? What do you say? I'm all for it. I almost explode. Bud laughs again. Okay, first let's look at the original affidavit they say your secretary signed. He pulls out the original affidavit and places it on the table. First off, Jake, do you know anything about printers and the Secret Service? The Secret Service? I ask. Yes. The U.S. Secret Service is part of the Treasury Department. Everyone knows they are directly responsible for protecting the president, but their original mandate was to protect the nation's money supply. When counterfeiting occurs, it is the Secret Service that is involved. What does the Secret Service have to do with Susie and me? I ask, a little alarmed. Nothing, except that they've done us a big favor. What do you mean? With the advent of computers, especially printers, copiers, and the like, it's become much easier to print out something that looks like a $20 bill. Of course, for a quality counterfeit bill, you have to use the right paper and watermarks. That's another story. But it is possible to print something that looks very authentic at first glance. The Secret Service talked most, if not all, printer manufacturers into printing an almost invisible mark on every sheet of paper. Almost every color printer sold in this country prints an invisible unique identification code on each sheet of paper. The mark only shows up when the right ultraviolet light is used. Even if you guessed how to see it, it would mean nothing to you because it's a code. I'm starting to get worried. Are you saying we can tell what printer these pages were printed on? Not only that, son, he continues. Since printers are connected to computers, and computers have a concept of time, this invisible mark contains not only the printer's unique code, but also the date and time. If you discover this mark and learn how to decipher it, you can determine not only which printer printed a piece of paper, but also on what day and at what time. Actually, seeing the mark is very easy. You just need the right light source. The hard part is figuring out how to decipher the mark. Unfortunately, every printer manufacturer has developed their own code. But lucky for us, I know a guy who has those codes, and I showed him your affidavit. And what did he find out? Asks Bill before I can answer. Both pieces of paper were printed on the same printer. Oh, I say, hoping to hear otherwise. But they were printed at different times, he adds with a smile. At different times? I repeat. Yes, both sheets were printed on January 17th. The second sheet was printed first at 7:03 a.m. The first sheet was printed 15 hours later, at 10:13 p.m. How can that be? Stunned, I ask. That's the day Heidi said she signed the affidavit, but she also said she flew to Houston late that afternoon. She was in the air at the time the first page was printed. She couldn't have signed that page. Quite right, Jake. But then, how did her initials end up on it? Obviously, Heidi never put them there. Truth be told, from a forensic standpoint, it wasn't a very good attempt to create a forged document. The second page was printed on a laser printer using toner. Heidi's initials look real and are written in black ink. We may even be able to determine what pen was used based on analyzing the ink, but that's overkill. The important thing is that Heidi's initials on the first page are done in printer toner. Oh my God, I muttered, realizing that this completely refuted the original affidavit. Okay, I realize toner versus ink, but I'm curious. If the set of initials on the first page were printer-generated, were they an exact copy of the second page? You're on the right track, boy. You're smart, despite what your father grumbles about you, he grinned. We checked it out, and the two initials aren't exactly the same. We don't have proof of exactly how it was done, but I think Heidi's signature was scanned from the original first page and then digitally altered, then transferred to the fake first page. That first page was then printed out. I guess I'd feel better if the two sets of initials matched. But at least we finally have hard evidence that this whole thing was faked, I muttered. There's one more thing, Jake, Bud added. I make a lot of progress because I know a lot of people. I change favors all the time. Bill laughs. And who do you exchange favors with, Bud? Bud looks at Bill with a smirk. I'd never tell you with whom. But I do know that Jake's firm rents the 14th and 15th floors in a building in downtown Dallas. And I also know that security for the entire building is outsourced and that a pass is required to access all offices. Don't tell me. I smile. Yes, a friend of a friend of a friend accidentally printed out the pass access log for 2 floors leased by your firm on January 17th between midnight and midnight on the 18th. And, I ask, not wanting to stay in suspense. See for yourself, he grins, taking the printout and tossing it on the desk. With an equally interested Bill over my shoulder, I quickly scan the report. I was most interested in the access for the first half of the day. A few tokens were checking in and out in the early morning hours. I figured they were either maintenance or security personnel. But 2 entries caught my interest. At 6:23 a.m., 2 badges were used on the 15th floor a few seconds apart. I raised my eyes to Bud, disappointment reflected on my face. Okay, we have 2 interesting pass numbers, but who are they? Tisk, 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 tisk. A little faith, Jake. He takes a second printout from the same folder and tosses it on the table between Bill and me. I laugh. You like to drag this out too much. Bill takes the second printout, which apparently lists all the pass numbers for everyone in the building. Looking over each other's shoulders, we scan Bill's list looking for the two numbers that met at 623 on my list. Found it, he says. Evelyn J. Hinckley. Screw her, I mutter. I hand the second number to Bill and watch him flip a few pages. Timothy K. Schmidt, he issues. I slowly lean back in my chair. I'm going to destroy that bastard. I look up and see Bud staring at me intently. He shifts his gaze to Bill. Jake, I can tell what you're thinking, and I think your lawyer can too. I can tell you from personal experience that it's not worth going to jail over a woman. He glances at Bill again and continues. I'll share a personal story with you someday, so don't go ruminating about it and hatching plans. You still have a hard road ahead of you, and you don't need criminal charges on top of what you've already gotten. I mull over Bud's words and nod, sitting back down. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, he's right. But, Jake, we still have a lot of evidence, so let's not get hung up on one fragment. We've put a couple big holes in those words in the affidavit, but the pictures say 1,000 words, right? So let's take a closer look at these pictures. I had someone I trust go through the negatives. It's safe to say that these photos have not been doctored. The person who took these photos used regular ASA film, not a digital camera. A digital photograph can always be declared a forgery, whether it is or not. But it's much harder to clean up a negative with an airbrush. I don't know if it was done on purpose, but they've created a largely uncorroborated set of evidence. I'm sorry, Jake, but the pictures are real, and I have to believe you're the one starring. Bud looks at me for a moment before continuing. We suspect the photos were staged, and we can prove it with small pieces of evidence. For one thing, we know that someone else took the photos. The only way one of the two people in the picture could have operated the camera is with a remote control and a tripod. My examiner zoomed in on several photos, focusing on the items on the night table. The first 3 photos were taken from virtually the same position and watch. We know they were all taken at 1:30 a.m. Interestingly, the position of your Jake's body is identical in all 3 photos. Now, in the 4th photo, things get a little more interesting. The time has changed to 1:31 a.m., and this photo is the only one that shows any movement on your part. In the other 4 photos, your body position is identical to the 4th photo. Unless you count my wife, it's highly suspicious that someone hardly moves at all while doing this. There is another interesting point about the 4th photo. The expert I took the pictures from thinks the camera has shifted a good foot to the left. How did you figure that out? Asks Bill. It's the calendar and clock on the night table, Bud replies. He pulls 2 more photos out of the folder, examines them for a while, and then places them on the table for Bill and me to see. Pointing to the first new photo, Bud continues, This is an enlargement of the nightstand from the 3rd photo. From the camera's point of view, notice that the calendar is in front and to the right of the clock. The leftmost edge of the calendar overlaps the right edge of the clock. Now look at the same view from the 4th photo. We are distracted for a few moments and immediately see what Bud is pointing out. The enlargement of the 4th photo does indeed show a small gap between the calendar and the clock. I can see that, I say. That gap could only appear if the clock, calendar, or camera were moving, and it's safe to say that the clock or calendar did not move. That's right, Bud says. Like I said, my expert was even able to suggest that the camera had moved about a foot to the left. I told him your height, and he figured out the distance between your waist and the top of your head. Taking that as a basis, he figured the camera was about 9 feet away. Once he knew that, he could simply use geometry and determine how far the camera was moving. Great stuff, Bud, Bill chimed in. Now we've proven that there was at least one other person in the room. Oh, we've only scratched the surface, Bill. I had a very nice trip to Houston. Bud laughs. So what else? I ask anxiously. Bud laughs again. Keep your pants on, kid. You got a hot date tonight, or... Bud suddenly stops halfway through. I'm sorry, Jake. It came out of my mouth before I had time to think about what I was saying. I shake my head and tell him it's okay and that he should continue. Blushing a little, Bud says, I spent most of my time in Houston at just the hotel where you're staying, Jake. I asked around and got the name of the bellhop who was there the longest. If you want to know what goes on in a hotel, talk to the bellhops or janitors. I found one young guy who'd worked there for a few years, and all he needed was a picture of Grant to get him singing at the top of his lungs. The first thing I did was show him one of those pictures and asked about the calendar. He said they didn't use anything like that in the rooms. A calendar like that could only be there if a customer brought it in. Then this bellhop starts playing detective on me, pouncing on the photo. He blabbed that the water bottle was not provided by the hotel. I asked him how he knew that. He said that the hotel had an exclusive contract with the Ice Mountain brand and that the water was Aquafina. So, Jake, that's a question for you. Did you bring water to the room? No. I don't think so. I'm perplexed, trying to remember. I certainly didn't leave the hotel, buy water and bring it back. You know I don't tolerate alcohol well and often only drink water. While I was there, I only drank what was downstairs in the lobby or in the minibar in the room. You told me on Monday that you and a few other guys were out celebrating on Saturday night. What did you drink then? I had an iced tea at dinner. After that, I had one beer and then water. Wait a minute. I just remembered something. We each bought a couple mugs. Of course, I was cheap because I was only drinking water by then. I remember when Schmidt bought the last glass. He said he needed to go to the restroom and brought the drinks back himself. I didn't even need water, but he brought me a bottle anyway. And I drank it. In fact, as I remember now, I took that bottle, half full, to my room. I suddenly started to get very tired, so I hung it up and went to my room. I don't remember anything else until the next morning. I look at Bud. What are you smiling about? I ask him. Well, what you just told me matches up with what else I've learned. Do you have something else? Asks Bill. Oh yes, something big. I told you I made friends with that messenger. So I got him to do something for me. I needed Franklin this time, but it was worth it. Well, what was it? I asked. One of the first things I noticed upon entering the hotel was the security cameras. I asked the bellboy if they were only in the lobby or everywhere. He said they are only at the front desk and in the main hallways of each floor near the elevators. I asked if he could find out what room you were staying in and if the entry on that floor was available for the evening of January 15th. That's when I had to shell out the Franklin, but like I said, it was worth it. Bud reaches into his raft and pulls out a VHS tape. I watch him get up and walk over to the TV standing at the end of the room. Now I've already watched it a few times and even did some extra work on it, so everything is already queued up in the right place. Bud presses the place button on his recorder and an image flashes on the screen. It's a view of the hallway. In the foreground on the left are two elevator doors. To the right is a merchandise kiosk and one of the old floor ashtrays for cigarette butts that has been turned into a trash can. In the distance, a long corridor with an endless number of hotel room doors. The upper right corner displayed the date and time. January 15th at 1:23 a.m. In the lower right corner was written #18. A few seconds after the image appears, we see the leftmost elevator in the lower left corner of the screen open. We cannot look into the elevator, but soon two figures emerge from it and begin walking down the hallway away from us. Both of them are wearing coats, and the larger of the two is also wearing a hat. From his height and gait, he appears to be a man. The second one is recognizable by her curly hair down to the middle of her back. This is the woman from my photos. We watch them walk down the hallway. As we watch, Bud tells us that he went and counted the number of doors between the elevator and my hotel room. He says they stop right in front of my room. As the three of us watch, we see a man in an overcoat pull out a keycard, open my door, and disappear into the room. Holy shit, I exclaim. That proves that someone entered my room just before the pictures were taken. You did it, Bud. Not so fast, Bill says. I agree it seems like icing on the cake, But those two doubting Thomasons I heard this morning won't take it the same way. What do you mean? I ask. It's quite obvious that it's the woman in the pictures. But the man in the pictures could have been you. He was about your height. They will claim that this is proof of your adultery. After all, no one but you should have had your keycard. Oh shit, you're right. Not so fast, Kimosabi, Bud laughed. I haven't shown you everything yet. For one thing, that's not the only tape I got. I managed to get all of Jake's floor tapes from that night. The tape shows Jake entering his room an hour and a half early and not coming out until the next morning. Second, I mentioned that I reached out to several people for help. I reached out to several people in Houston. As soon as I saw the footage, I immediately rushed to another video expert I know and asked him to take a look at it. At first, my expert reviewed the footage several times and said it was unlikely that we would be able to learn anything about the two men, since they seemed to be aware of the camera and turned their faces as soon as they approached the camera's field of view. But then he started concentrating on the old chrome ashtray. He advanced the film to the point where the elevator doors were just starting to open. Then he began to fan out and enlarge the section of the frame near the ashtray. That's what he got on the first explosion. Bud reached into his magic bag of tricks and pulled out another folder. This time, he pulled out one picture. It was a shot of an ashtray. Right on the corner of the chrome ashtray, you could see the open elevator doors and two people standing there. Shit, I said. We can almost make them out. Hold your horses, Bud says. It's a magnification zoom. Bud pulls out another picture and puts it on his desk. Bill and I look at it, then at each other. Is that Schmidt? Asks Bill. I look at the photograph again. Despite the graininess and some distortion due to the curvature of the chrome ashtray, we could clearly see two elevator doors in the shape of two brackets. And in the center of those two curved elevator doors are two faces. One belongs to the woman in my photos. The other belongs to the vice president of sales at my firm, none other than Thomas K. Schmidt. I whistled. I'm not done yet, says Bud gleefully. I've asked the messenger boy to access the security records on your floor for this evening. It shows that someone from maintenance entered your room at 1:23 a.m. that morning. I tracked the guy down, but he didn't admit to anything except that he lost his card that night. He didn't find out until 4 a.m. or so. I'll bet $1 to a donut that he took the bribe. After all, that's how I got all my information. Bud raises his hand as I try to speak. One more thing, Jake, and I'm done. The messenger even recognized the woman in your pictures. She's a high-class prostitute. He gave me her name, and I even tracked her down. She wouldn't answer many questions, but said she was hired for a prank. She was just pretending to have fun with you, but she never did. Of course, she refused to let me tape her or sign a document. Bud smiled and tossed the audio tape on the table. But, as they say, as luck would have it, my tape recorder accidentally turned on. So I screwed up and taped it anyway. There's no way you can admit it into evidence, but it might carry some weight with one prosecutor. Bud tosses the last picture on the table, and we look down at my partner in bed. There she is, Jake. There's your mystery whore. I lean back in my chair and laugh, more out of relief than for any other reason. A deep laugh. The one I've needed for days now. I look at the clock and see that it's almost 10:30 p.m. I quickly call Vicky Gambino. She doesn't answer, but I leave a message saying that Bill and I would like to meet with her and Susie tomorrow. We have one last consideration for Susie, and if this doesn't convince her of my innocence, I won't fight her divorce suit. Bill and Bud are silent as I make the call. Bill puts his hand on my shoulder. I smirk, and the two of us start discussing strategy for the next day. Bud gets up, makes fresh coffee, and for the next hour we discuss several ideas. Just as we're about to break up for the evening, my cell phone rings, and it's Gambino. At the same time, Bud's cell phone rings, and I get up and go outside. Vicky says she got my message and talked to Susie. They will meet us at Susie's office tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. After hanging up, I go back to the conference room and tell Bill, game on. Bill and I quietly discuss the next day's strategy while Bud finishes his phone conversation with a few grumbles. Finally, he hangs up the phone and sits quietly, a little too quietly. Is something wrong, Bud? I ask. Not sure yet, he answers gruffly. I still have a few irons in the fire. I'll let you know when the time is right. Bill and I only look at each other in puzzlement. Bud seems a little sour for a man who has just dissected this little situation. He seems a little evasive, but maybe it has to do with one of the other agency's cases. I can't think of anything that could go wrong in our case that could cloud what was uncovered today. When Bud's cases went south, Bill and I silently agreed that it was time to disband our little group. After exchanging handshakes, Bill and I go outside, say a few last words, and disperse. I go back to my hotel and break the seal off the minibar. As I walk out onto the balcony with a cold drink, I sigh heavily and begin to reflect on the past few days. Since Friday, life has been a complete roller coaster and whirlwind. For perhaps the first time, I am beginning to seriously consider what happened on Friday night. My mind was in turmoil. I was so furious that night, but I can also see how Schmidt set the whole thing up. In retrospect, it's easy to see how Susie came to that conclusion. But couldn't she have talked to me about it instead of humiliating me and literally sending me to the hospital? Her reaction was quick and murderous, but she's always been like that. I knew it even before we were married. I'm still very angry at her for not even giving me a chance to talk about it. And then there's the fact that she entertained that asshole right in front of me, even though I know how ruthless she can be. The way she tricked me to lure me into the chair and then betrayed me. Can we get through this? Deep down, I know I love her. It's not a question. Strangely, it's not even a question of trust. It was an isolated act she committed as revenge. She was reacting to her own rage, and when she finds out the truth, she will be killed. I take a moment to return to the hotel room to grab a rare second beer, then return to the balcony. Sinking into a chair, I sigh, realizing that I want to fix all of this somehow, but I'm not sure how to put the pieces together. Sipping my beer, I stare out at the lights of Dallas. I feel like quaffing one and getting drunk, but I know I need to get my thoughts together for my meeting with Susie tomorrow. Halfway through my beer, my cell phone rings. I quickly check it and see that it's Bud. Bud is equally curt and tells me to expect the package at the front desk of my hotel no later than 7 in the morning. He says the package will contain a few things marked for Benner's eyes only. He makes me promise that I will deliver it only to Benner and not look in any of the labeled folders. I reluctantly make him promise not to, but only after a few minutes of arguing with him. He doesn't say much, as is typical of his nature while I argue with him. The only thing he replies is that there is a time and place for everything. Now is not the time. I grumble back, and Bud makes me promise not to look in the folders one last time. Hanging up the phone, I think back to when he was in his office and try to remember anything that would give me a clue as to why he seems so rude. I shake my head, realizing that Bud said very little even then. As I call Bill to tell him about the package, a kind of foreboding comes over me. Bill is as puzzled as I am and suggests we meet at the same little cafe no later than 7:45, so he has a chance to see what Bud put in the package. Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. To say I slept restlessly this night would be an incredible understatement. The only thing harder than sleep was keeping myself from peering into the package that was waiting for me at the hotel front desk. Seeing all the contents labeled with Bill's name, I somehow managed to keep myself from examining it. The only reason I was able to resist was because I had given my word to an old friend like Bud, no less. Bill has just joined me in the booth I've taken up in the corner. First, I lay out on the table the coffee I bought him and then Bud's package. He lifts the lid of the box, frowns, extracts 2 folders from it, and then stands up and walks a few steps away. He looks through both folders while I retrieve a voice recorder from my jacket pocket. It's also labeled for Bill, but I kind of broke a promise I made to Bud. I promised not to look in any of the folders. I never said a word about not listening to the audio recordings. I stare at the recorder, desperately trying to contain the anger that threatens to boil in a bottle. Anger at Susie, if not pure anger at that asshole Schmidt. Only the desperation in my heart helps me hold back the rage. Bill returns to our table and asks if I'm ready to head to Susie's office. I ask him to wait a minute and then explain what the tape is and what I heard on it. He puts his hand on my shoulder reassuringly, and we discuss what we can do with this information. The mood is not at all like it was last night. Grimly picking up our materials, we start walking towards my wife's office. As we enter the office, there is a look of anticipation on both of our faces. I silently watch as the expectation is replaced by bewilderment on the face of both of them. I realize that they expected us to enter the stage with explosive music. But instead, we entered like rowers, ready to bury the dead. Bill reaches into his briefcase and pulls out the affidavit he received yesterday from Janine. He holds out a copy to Susie and Vicky. "What's this?" asks Susie. "I suggest you read it," says Bill. "It speaks for itself." "Where's the original?" asks Susie. "We have it. We plan to return it before we leave," says Bill. Both quickly scan the document and look at each other. "Did you see Heidi before she signed this?" asks Susie. "Yes, I did," Bill answers for me, and I remain silent. I can feel my anger burning in the back of my mind. I don't trust myself to speak up. "Then I agree with your counselor. This document speaks for itself," says Susie. "It states that Heidi, when Jake is in front of her, will sign anything." "What?" I shout. Bill's hand instantly and firmly squeezes my forearm, suppressing the next words that should have come out of my mouth. "Of course she signed it, Jake. She was your secretary for years. She's been your mistress for an unknown amount of time. You intimidated her and basically forced her to sign this new affidavit." "Have you completely lost control of all your feelings?" I reply incredulously. "You're completely ignoring everything you know about Heidi and me for the last 8 years." "You've been cheating on me." "I have no idea who you are," replies Susie. "After last Friday night, I can say the same thing." I hiss, forgetting my promise to let Bill talk. He squeezes my forearm even tighter in response. At least this time Susie has to look away. But only for a moment, and when she looks me in the eye again, the prosecutor's mask is already in place. Bill pulls another document out of his briefcase. "This is a copy of the original document you gave to my client," Bill says, handing each of them a copy of the original affidavit. "We're curious if any of you noticed the difference in tone between the first and second pages of the affidavit, which you apparently believe to be true. Did you notice that page 1 is a harassment complaint? The second page accuses my client of poor leadership skills as if it were a performance evaluation. The two pages don't fit together." "It sounds like you and your client share that opinion," says Vicky Gambino. "Susie," I whispered, forgetting my promise again. "Heidi told me she's never seen that first page. She says the first page was my certification. She says she signed the second page and was told to initial both pages. She says there was no notary there." "Of course she'll say that, Jake. You made her cover your ass. Did anyone notice that this woman signed 2 completely different affidavits? Doesn't that speak volumes about her character?" "You know very well about Heidi's character," I challenge. "That's what I want to see. A husband sticking up for his mistress against his wife." I look at her in amazement. "Kettle on kettle," I reply simply. But at the same time, I see Susie's resolve weaken a little. She knows I'm telling the truth about Heidi's character. She may have lost faith in me, but not in Heidi. "Why hasn't Heidi said anything about this until now? She should have found out about the affidavit as early as last week," Susie objected. "Heidi's brother relapsed into drug addiction and was sent to prison. Heidi was in Houston with her family trying to deal with the situation. I wonder if any of you would hazard a guess as to who actually signed this document," asks Bill, waving his hand over a copy of the original affidavit. Neither of them succumbs to Bill's ruse. The executive director of human resources herself, Miss Hinckley, went to Heidi's house to get Heidi's signature, just hours before Heidi left for Houston. Hinckley offered to help Heidi with her brother's problem. She told Heidi not to worry about how much time she needed to spend in Houston. Let her spend as much time as she needed. Hinckley even told her that my client had personally sent her to Heidi with instructions not to worry about any family leave. Jake did not send Miss Hinckley on this trip. Why would the executive director of human resources go to such lengths to help Jake's former secretary without even giving Jake a heads up? Why wouldn't she send one of the several HR representatives who work under her? And that's not to mention that Jake didn't even know about Heidi's brother issues until yesterday. And from what we understand, Miss Hinckley is a close personal and professional ally of Mr. Schmidt, with whom you recently formed an alliance, if I'm not mistaken. Susie looks at me at the mention of her and Schmidt. For a moment, she turns pale, but then almost as quickly, the mask of stern prosecutor descends, and she throws her hands up theatrically. All these arguments are irrelevant, she says. The pictures themselves condemn you. Even if the woman in the pictures isn't Heidi, you were clearly having fun with someone else. I'm not divorcing Heidi. I'm divorcing you. Bill's hand tightens on my forearm again, warning me. Bill looks at Vicky and says, as we realized from yesterday's meeting, we had two and only 2 points of contention leading up to the divorce suit. While both of these points are damning on their own, together they make a compelling case. We have already cast great doubt on the first claim, the affidavit. We have more information that will completely destroy any remaining doubt about the original affidavit and prove that it was forged. The second affidavit is the photographs about which we have considerable doubt. Wouldn't it make sense for everyone to cool down, take a step back, and familiarize themselves with the facts before proceeding? The original affidavit has not been proven, says Vicky Gambino. As far as anyone knows, these photos depict Miss Beavis, and now she's trying to cover for her boss. After accusing him, she has come to her senses and won't bite the hand that feeds her. Nothing proves that the original document is invalid. Bill looks at me, and I shake my head faintly, not wanting to reveal the tattoo information at this point. It's not like either of them are receptive. As just mentioned, there is data that will dispel any doubts about the original affidavit. We just need time and an opportunity to present them. I sincerely doubt it, and I'm tired of all these grandiose statements, Susie chirped. Jake, believe me, I've scrutinized the evidence. I got sick to my stomach. Then I brought in the experts, and they confirmed everything. This charade you and your lawyer persist in playing out only makes you look even more desperate and despicable. Desperate and despicable? The fact that you have come to these conclusions proves only one thing. You have failed to look at the situation objectively, nor have you considered all the facts. Obviously, you have completely ignored any character issues. After you see what we are going to show you this morning, I am sure you will look at it very differently. What we're going to show you will completely override the 2 pieces of evidence you're going to hang me on. I literally gritted my teeth to keep myself from adding any more comments about the previous Friday and, well, as Bud said, this wasn't the time or place. At least, not right now. In the back of my mind, I wonder why I'm even sitting here. Jake, this isn't a game. It's not something you have to win at all costs, even making up nonsense. Suddenly, I realized why I was still sitting here, wanting to prove my innocence. Everything we show you can be easily confirmed, or at least it already has been. But in some ways, you are wrong. You are right. This is not a game. But I have to win. You have accused me of something extremely egregious, something I would never do. You insulted my dignity and my character. And you have brutally punished me, both emotionally and physically, for something I never did. Even if you refuse to see the light, what we've done over the past few days to completely refute everything you've dumped on me is very important to me. It's up to you alone to decide if it's important to you, and ultimately, to us. Thank you for that brilliant observation, counselor, Susie remarks wryly. I smile back at her, mostly because I know it pisses her off when she tries to get under my skin, so I just smile back. To interrupt the deteriorating conversation, Bill intervenes. Do either of you know about the invisible printer codes that the U.S. Secret Service requires printer manufacturers to print on every sheet of paper? Not surprisingly, Susie knows all about it. Vicky Gambino, on the other hand, has never heard of it. I sit back and sip my coffee while Susie, in her usual concise and efficient manner, brings her attorney up to speed. So what about these invisible codes? Asks Vicky. Are you aware that the two sheets that make up the supposedly original affidavit you gave me on Monday were printed at different times on the same day? Doesn't that make sense? Asks Vicky. The sheets would have come out of the printer at different times. Yes, they would have, Bill parries. Only in this case, the second sheet was printed at 7:03 in the morning. The first sheet was printed 15 hours later, at 10:13 p.m. This sheet was printed after the affidavit was signed by Heidi and supposedly notarized. It was printed a few hours after Heidi boarded the plane and was in Houston. If Heidi was in Houston, how did her initials end up on this page? I watch Susie sit up a little straighter and narrow her eyes skeptically. Can you prove it? You can prove it yourself. Your staff has even more experience than we do. This is something that could easily have been done before, Bill parries. Bill reaches into his briefcase and goes through several folders until he finds the right one. Here you go. He tosses the folder on the desk. This is the same folder and the same original copy of the so-called affidavit you gave me on Monday. Have your experts review it? She takes the folder from the desk and opens it, inspecting the contents. I will, she says without emotion. So, let's assume they were printed at different times. That doesn't necessarily prove malice, as you claim. Perhaps there was a typo, and they simply reprinted the first sheet? Miss Gambino, Bill spoke quickly. I'm sure you realize that would never be the case with a document that was supposedly notarized. But more importantly, if they really did reprint the first sheet, how do you explain Heidi's initials on it? Remember, Heidi was in Houston by the time that sheet was printed. Not only that, I add. Heidi's initials on the first sheet aren't written in ink, but in toner. The same toner that was used to print the first sheet. This fact corroborates Heidi's recent testimony that she never saw that page or put her initials on it. I think we have sufficiently proven that at least the first sheet of the affidavit you submitted is in fact a forgery. Not only was it not signed by Heidi Bevis, but she never saw that page at all until Jake presented it to her this week, adds Bill. Without admitting anything, the look on Susie and Gambino's faces told me all I needed to know. They know the affidavit was forged. I hope you realize that, Bill adds. The very fact that the affidavit was forged also shows malice. I hope you don't mean to say that my client forged the affidavit or did anything with malice, says Vicky quickly. It seems pretty obvious to me that your client has done several things quite maliciously. Hotly, I add. Bill's squeezing hand forces my mouth shut again. We're not implying that your client had anything to do with forging that affidavit. We even have evidence of who did it. It is unfortunate that your client did not do her due diligence to discover this information on her own. It only took us, with far fewer resources, a few hours once the document was in our possession. But we suspected from the beginning that it was fake, and your client did not. Bill raises his hand to cut off Gambino's objections. We want to move on and present you with other information. Reaching into his briefcase again, Bill pulls out another folder. Opening it, he holds out 2 copies of the pass log for the day the first affidavit was typed. We've already highlighted the important information about when access to the floor was gained, as well as who these badges belong to. Bill explains what these documents are and emphasizes that at the time the second sheet was printed at 7:03 a.m., the badge log indicates that there were only 2 people on the floor. Bill pauses, giving both women the opportunity to determine for themselves that those 2 people were Hinckley and Schmidt. Unable to hold back, Bill says, I know who gave you that affidavit, Susie, and I also know that you are aware that he and I have been feuding for years. You knew he'd had a grudge against me for a long time. You should have taken that into account from the beginning. He set me up, and you supported him. I cast a glance at Susie, and this time she can't stand my gaze and averts her eyes. Bill says, Now, for what was certainly the more damaging evidence about the photographs. Yesterday, we discussed the very short period of time during which the photographs were taken. We also discussed the fact that my client did not move during that period of time. So you admit that you are in this photo? Asked Susie bluntly. Yes, unfortunately, I answer. So even if it's not Heidi, you still cheated on me with a woman who looks like Heidi. Maybe you even fantasized that it was Heidi, Susie challenged. Do you really think so badly of me that you have to make up my faults? I hotly reply. I pull myself together and continue. Yes, that's me in that picture. And no, that's not Heidi. If you look closely at the last picture, you can see the top part of the tattoo at the very base of her back. Heidi, as you can guess, Susie, doesn't have any tattoos. I'm convinced it's not Heidi, Jake. The problem isn't Heidi. The problem is you, Jake, Susie says with returning anger. I would like the opportunity to present our findings without being challenged on every point, Bill says. Susie looks at Gambino, then at me. No, she says simply. Fine, Bill says. This will only slow down our presentation, but it won't change it. For one thing, the reason Jake didn't move in the pictures is because he was on drugs. On drugs, says Susie. How do you know that? And why don't you tell me about it on Monday? I'll come back to that later. Right now, I just want to get on with it. Secondly, those pictures were staged. We've already agreed on the one about the clock and calendar. No, we didn't agree. You discussed and we rejected. Susie challenged again. Nothing was agreed upon. First of all, do you really think my client is stupid enough to allow a photo to be taken of him while he's cheating? Second, we have already proven that one of your two main questions was maliciously tampered with. We know that a lot of effort was put into crafting a false affidavit. Don't you think this calls into question the issue of the photographs? That the people behind the affidavit would not go so far as to stage the photographs? It's with great effort that I refrain from commenting on how stupid your client might be. And there could be several reasons why the clock and calendar are arranged the way they are. What about the water bottle? Asks Bill. The water bottle? What about it? You don't mean to say that the hotel doesn't sell or provide water, do you? This hotel has an exclusive contract with Mountain Ice. They don't provide any other kind. They don't sell it in the vending machines, or in the dining rooms, or in room service. If you look closely, this water bottle belongs to the Aquafina brand. It doesn't belong. You could have brought that water bottle yourself. Yes, and he did. And the bottle was given to him by Mr. Schmidt. How convenient, it's all Schmidt's fault, Susie challenged. Is he the reason you cheated? No, this whole situation isn't just his fault. It's also partially yours, I hissed. And I didn't cheat. This time, Bill only glared at me, and I sank back into the chair, heated. There's a witness. A certain Mr. Weston was with both Jake and Mr. Schmidt. We haven't had a chance to question Mr. Weston yet, but we're sure that when we do, he'll be able to confirm that Schmidt returned with the last of the drinks and a bottle of water for Jake. This occurred about 15 minutes before Jake began to feel drowsy. At that time, he said goodnight to both Weston and Schmidt and retired to his room, all by himself. I smile as Susie starts looking at her hands. She always does this when she's stressed or feels a situation slipping away. Did you see one of those flip calendars at the hotel? Asks Bill. Susie looks up. I'm not the person to answer questions. I'm going to assume you're dodging the question and have not seen one of those calendars in the hotel. Or have you seen one? No, she declared emphatically. Would you like to know who has one of those calendars on his desk? I added, improvising. I had no idea if Schmidt had such a calendar or not, but I can see the possibility of a bluff. Susie doesn't answer, her gaze drifting down to her hands again. We can prove there was a third person in the room. Do you have proof that there was someone else in the room? Asks Vicky. First of all, we know the camera was moved. The calendar and clock were turned to set the time and date for the person taking the pictures. Which begs the question, why would you think my client would allow a third party to take pictures of him cheating? Or more likely that he was set up, as we've already proven with the affidavit. How do you know the camera wasn't on a tripod? It looks to me like it's at the same angle, asks Vicky, and Susie is now silent and looking at her hands. Bill explains that there is a zoom on the pictures, as well as the angle of the clock and calendar. He then reaches into his briefcase and pulls out a folder of negatives. Tossing it on the table next to the other folders, he suggests that they have their own experts examine it as closely as we have. I look back at Susie. She's clenched her hands into fists, her gaze fixed. I don't even know if she's still listening. Jake, you said you have proof that you were drugged? Says Susie suddenly, returning to the conversation. Bill intervenes. Direct evidence? No. Lots of circumstantial evidence. Yes. We don't have a water bottle to analyze. We can't analyze Jake's blood at this late date. But how do you think these photos were taken? Did you notice that there's no evidence that Jake even did anything to this woman in the photos? Come on, Susie objects disbelievingly and stands up. I say, look for yourself, Susie. Only this time look with open eyes. Look without being blinded by what you wanted to believe I was capable of. Would it matter to you if you found out that I woke up the next morning in just my underwear? Susie looks at me, then back at the pictures. Shaking her head, she sits down. Jake, everything you're saying is aimed at you being set up. Why would he go to such extremes? Susie, you already know he went to the extreme of forging an affidavit, and you already know why. I've been telling you this for months. He went to those extremes for several reasons, and they're not so far-fetched if you consider the purpose. We were both aiming for the same partnership, a very lucrative partnership. One of us had to get our way. There is a man behind all this, and you know it. You know him as well as you know me. The other reason is that we both just don't like each other, but I think his attitude goes beyond and borders on jealousy and hatred. Nothing would make him happier than to tease me as much as possible and then rub my nose in it. But he needed someone close to him to really hurt me. I watch all the color drain out of Susie's face. I can see that she now fully realizes how badly she has been deceived. I wonder if she has begun to realize that even though she wasn't the one who stuck the blade in my back, she had a hand in twisting it. Vicky asks if we have similar evidence of framing in regards to the photos. Bill pulls out a VHS tape that Bud has created of various segments of the hotel's security system. After getting permission, he walks over to the side of her office and turns on the TV. Inserting the tape, he takes the remote control and returns to our side of the desk. This is the footage from the security camera on the floor of Jake's hotel room the night these pictures were taken. He presses the fast-forward button until the clock reads 1:23 a.m. He rewinds the tape back a minute and decides to let the videotape say it all. A few seconds later, we see the elevator doors open and two people get out and walk down the hallway. They stop and use a keycard to enter the room. He rewinds the tape forward again until it says 1:35 a.m. A few moments later, the same two men exit the room and, turning away from the camera, continue down the hallway. They open another door labeled stairwell and disappear. He flips the tape over and plays the whole sequence again. This was Jake's room they went into, Bill adds quietly. It was the same night as the pictures. They were only in his room for 12 minutes. They were in his room during the time period the pictures were taken. If you want me to play the tape again, you'll see that they even know about the security camera and do everything they can to make sure their faces are never in its sight. Would you like me to play the tape again? Vicky looks at Susie, who is now clutching her hand a little more aggressively. She seems to have lost some more color. Vicky looks at me again and shakes her head. I have one more thing we want to show you, Bill explains. He reaches down again and pulls out another folder. These are your copies, Bill says, as he holds out a folder with two sets of pictures. Then he switches the tape to 1:23 a.m. when the elevator doors first open. See the chrome trash can in the lower right corner? He asks. Neither of them answers anything. It's important. Look, says Bill firmly. It's more of an order than a request. Susie looks and stops kneading her hands. Yes, I see, she says disappointedly. Look at the first picture. It's a snapshot of that shot on the tape. Throwing the photo on the table, they see pretty much the same thing they see on TV. Now look at the second picture. This is an enlargement of the lower right corner of the first picture, Bill adds, as I toss another picture. The top rounded part of the chrome ashtray is clearly visible in the picture. Now look at the third picture, which is an enlargement of the second picture, Bill says. I look across the table at the photo that now lies in front of Susie. The outline of the trash can is gone, but the chrome shows the images. One last thing, this is an enlargement of the third photo, Bill says. I glance again at the photograph in front of Susie. It shows two men in long coats. The smaller one on the right has curly hair like Heidi's. The one on the left is a taller man. As we saw last night, the image is grainy, but at least it's clear to me who it is. It's not a very clear image, Vicky says. It might be difficult to present it in court. But I don't think it's necessary, do you? It should only have power in this room. And I think all four of us know exactly who it is. Susie lowers her eyes to her hands again. She seems to have detached herself from everything. Susie, I add. We even found the prostitute in the photos. She won't sign the affidavit, but she'll come here. She identified Schmidt as the man who paid her. She says she was told it was all a hoax. She'll also tell you that she thought I was drunk or something because I wasn't moving. I can hear Susie crying. Some part of me remembers what we had together and desperately wants to go to her. But another part remembers what she did recently and wants her to be in as much pain as I am. I realize that Susie was right. I lied to myself that I wouldn't win at any cost. But so far, I'm finding that I'm still losing. We're both going to lose. Vicky puts her hand on my shoulder and looks at me. She says that her client needs some time and that he'll get back to us. I'm a little annoyed by this. After everything I've been through, I want her to get on her knees and beg me to forgive her. I'm about to say something when I feel Bill's hand on my arm. I look back at Susie, then at Vicky. Vicky utters the word, please? I nod. Bill and I get up and turn to leave. At the door, I stop and look around. Susie, I finally say. She looks up at me, her eyes flooded with tears. I can feel my heart tearing in different directions, and I question whether I should say anything else. I wave my hand dismissively and turn away without another word. The door clicks loudly, closing behind me. Wednesday, 1 p.m. Bill and I are escorted into the same conference room where I met with the expert committee on Monday. The same 5 people are present. I smile at Tom and Christy as I sit down and make room for Bill. Shortly before the meeting, I had time to have a word with Tom Weston. He confirmed that he had mentioned Heidi's problem in his conversation with Hinckley. Heidi definitely had a personnel problem, and since Hinckley was the executive director of human resources, it was her department. He was surprised when I told him about Hinckley's personal involvement, but only with very minor details. Tom was able to confirm another point as well. He remembered that Schmidt had bought the last round of drinks for 2 reasons. First, because Schmidt had procrastinated for so long, and second, he had actually noticed that the bottle of water that was on the tray had no cap. Christy clears his throat, trying to start the meeting. "Excuse me," Christy says. She stands up and reaches across the table. "I don't think we've been introduced to each other," she addresses Bill. "You must be Christy Evans. Mr. Vickers has told me a lot about you. I'm Bill Benner. Mr. Vickers has hired me as his attorney." "I see," she says solemnly. "Mr. Vickers," Christy says formally. "You know, of course, that you are not entitled to outside representation." "I know I am entitled to representation," I reply. "Yes, you do, but only internal representation. This is not a court of law. We have to follow HR policy, which does not allow outside interference. I do not believe it is possible for me to get impartial internal representation. Therefore, I need external representation. If you believe otherwise, then I see no point in continuing this meeting at this time." I rise to my feet, quickly followed by Bill. Christy looks first at Tom, who nods, and then at Hinckley, who shrugs. "Mr. Vickers," Christy says dryly, "I have been appointed special counsel on this situation, and the partners have assigned me to handle the matter." An emergency meeting was held last night with all the partners of the firm, as well as members of this committee. After much discussion, the decision was made to terminate your employment with this company. The severance offer sent to you on Monday still stands, but only if you sign it now. In addition, you will be required to sign a document stating that you will not file any additional civil lawsuits against the company. I slowly sink back into my seat. Was this decided last night? I say, wincing. No one answers my question. I cast a glance at Tom Weston, who grimaces to my left. At a glance, I realize he was in the minority at this meeting. I look directly at Christy, who has a slight mist in her eyes and is doing her best to keep her composure. This day isn't turning out quite the way I planned, I think to myself. I feel an emptiness inside, a sudden loss. I invested myself in this company for years and then had to leave it on some damn asshole's trumped-up charges. I glance to my right and meet my eyes with Schmidt. The shit-eating grin on his face is too much, or maybe just enough, to inflame my insides. I look at Christy again. It was decided on Monday that I have until noon today to present to this board my response to the charges against me. The offer was made as a courtesy and was not binding on me in any way, Christy says obediently. Non-binding? Says Bill from my side. Mr. Benner, says Christy quickly, you have no standing at this meeting and I will have to escort you out of the building if you can't abstain. Shut up, Bill says, surprising everyone in the room, including me. Geez, now I distinctly remember why I didn't go into corporate law. Mr. Benner, interrupts Christy. You're going to hear me now, interrupts Bill, or you'll hear me in court, and I can assure you that what you will hear in court you will not like. Without waiting for a response, Bill began laying out all of the original charges and evidence we had uncovered over the past 2 days. I really enjoyed sitting back and watching. I especially enjoyed watching Hinckley. She must have changed 5 or 6 shades from white to crimson red when her personal involvement in this scam was revealed. I especially liked the way she blushed when Bill explained how she used the information provided by Tom Weston to convince Heidi to sign the original document. But the best part was when he described the hidden fingerprint codes and badge data. Bill also emphasized that the emergency meeting last night violated their policy regarding my termination. He also emphasized that my dismissal was based not only on trumped-up charges, but that senior management had violated criminal laws in creating forged documents, and that company resources had been used in the commission of the crimes. Therefore, Bill brushed it off, your original proposal is completely unacceptable. Then, under the parameters defined in our meeting yesterday, I'm afraid we will have to withdraw our severance offer, Christy replies. Fine, Bill replies. Your organization has done a great service to my client by withdrawing the offer. This opens the door for my client to file not only civil suits for wrongful termination, but also criminal charges not only against the organization, but also against specific executives. However, given that my client has devoted a significant portion of his life to this organization and still has some affection for it, he is willing to consider an offer that is at least 250% higher than the severance offer you withdrew. As compensation, my client will agree not to file a civil suit against the organization, which he will easily win. My client will also not provide the district attorney with any information about the criminal actions. In addition, my client will sign a non-disclosure and non-competition agreement. However, my client reserves the right to sue individuals for wrongs done to him outside of the company's jurisdiction. Bill spoke non-stop for 15 minutes or more. His sudden silence leaves a verbal vacuum in the room. Christy cleared her throat. I'll need to present this to all the partners. I'll give you until the end of business tomorrow. It will take me a few days to prepare them, she objects. You've had 2 emergency meetings within 48 hours. I'm sure you can have another meeting within the next 36 hours. I will prepare our documents for filing with the court tomorrow. If I do not receive a satisfactory response from you by the end of business tomorrow, we will file the papers in civil court first thing Friday, Bill states firmly. How do I get in touch with you? Asks Christy. And Bill pulls out a business card and holds it out across the table. Christy smiles and takes the card, then casts a glance at Hinckley and Schmidt to his left. I'll need to see you both in my office right after this meeting. I'll start with you, Miss Hinckley. I have several meetings this morning. I can meet with you this afternoon. Hinckley explains. Schmidt leans back nervously in his chair. No, Christie says. You can follow me to my office. If you need to cancel any appointments, my administrative assistant will do it for you. Christie looks to his right. Tom, would you mind walking Mr. Vickers and Mr. Benner to the door? Tom nods and the meeting disperses. Tom chuckles, telling me that the other managing partners will easily agree to the new package once they see all the shit that's going on. We exchange thanks for our years of working as colleagues. He asks me to let him know where I'm settling in and not to be an outsider. And finally, he tells me he's not going to see me off. He figures I know where the door is and isn't too worried about me stealing the printer or anything else. We shake hands, and I see him quickly heading down the aisle, but not toward his office, but toward Christie's office. Bill and I laugh as we head for the door. So, do you think you won, asshole? I hear behind me as we walk past the empty conference room. I turn around and see Schmidt leaning against the door jamb. Aren't you supposed to be taking your meds in Christie's office right now? I ask back. Screw that shit, he laughs. You know they're going to fire you, I tease. That evidence you faked was good enough to be bad. So what? There are better paying jobs at dozens of other companies. Schmidt laughs and walks off into the conference room. I quickly follow when Bill grabs my forearm. You don't want to do this, Jake, he warns. I have to do it, I say, and walk into the conference room, closing the door behind me. I walk right up to Schmidt. He's a few inches taller than me, but that doesn't scare me. You're never going to get that partnership, asshole. You'll be lucky to get out of jail. I fall to my knees as pain rolls across my face. I never realized or saw the forearm smash into the bridge of my nose. Stunned, I hear him laugh. You were always such a damn wuss. A goddamn lawyer wuss, he laughs. I try to clear my head, focus my vision. I'll tell you one thing, he continues. You're a good lawyer, except for one thing. You don't see the big picture, or at least you don't see it as well as I do. I'm going to destroy you, I mutter. Schmidt laughs. See, Vickers, you proved me right when you came in here and started talking about partnerships and proof. Do you really think it's all about partnership? Of course it is, I mutter. It's what you've been pushing for all along. It's also how to screw me. Schmidt laughs again. See, you're still proving me right. This had nothing to do with any goddamn job. It was about your wife. Unfortunately, that bitch wouldn't have given me the time of day in college, but she's sure as hell about it now. He laughs. You piece of shit, I hiss, my vision starting to come back into focus. You're a goddamn wuss. He growls. You don't get it, do you? You lost, asshole. My vision suddenly clears in blinding rage, and I jump up from my seat. Towering over him, I throw my head back and feel the back of my head smash into his nose. Leaning back as far as I can, I throw a few punches. I just started entertaining your life, I say. Bill looks at me, raising an eyebrow. You're making your lawyer's life interesting, he says. Are you okay? I've gotten better, I answer. But not bad, actually. He smiles. Let's get out of here. One thing first, I say as he groans. Seriously, I have to do this. Follow me, please. I walk the short distance to where marketing was. I walk straight to Schmidt's office and have mixed feelings when I find his administrative assistant at her desk. She watches me approach her desk and has a look of concern and surprise on her face. Betty, I begin. I don't want to get you in trouble. I just want to know one thing. Was my wife here yesterday? She looks at me and sighs. I close my eyes in pain as I see her nod. Did she go into Schmidt's office? She nods again. And the door was locked? She nods again. Thank you, Betty. I appreciate your honesty. I look at Bill. Come on, Bill, I say meekly. There's only one way to play this game now. Thursday, 11 a.m. As Bill and I take our seats, it's clear that the cluster bombs Bill dropped at yesterday's meeting resulted in heavy casualties. There were only 4 of us at today's meeting. Bill was there as my representative, and only Tom Weston and Christy Evans represented my old company. Where are the others? I asked. The Personnel Review Committee has been disbanded because your employment situation has already been resolved by Jake, Christy says much less formally than the day before. We're just discussing the terms of your severance package. I nod my head, realizing that behind the faint smile on Christy's face, much more has been said than expressed. Jake, Christy begins. After meeting with all the partners, your terms were accepted except for the money part. They agreed to increase the amount to $3 million. I raise my eyebrows in surprise and look at Bill. That offer equates to an increase of only 50%, Bill objects. That's significantly less than the $5 million we're looking for. Christy looks at Bill. That's our offer, she says simply. Bill and I look at each other. We both shrug as he pulls a folder out of his briefcase. Bill hands the folder to Christy. We watch as she opens it. She couldn't suppress the surprise reflected on her face. What's this? She exclaims. You're suing for $10 million? That's double what you asked for yesterday. As I said yesterday, our position is non-negotiable. You have executives who were included in the executive review process, falsified documents, worked on company time, and used company resources, Bill explains. The entire process of firing my colleague, initiated by this firm, was a conspiracy involving the most senior people in this company. And if that wasn't enough, my client was physically assaulted in this building by one of your senior executives. I'm aware of the physical confrontation, Mr. Benner, Christy replies, once again adopting an official tone. It's a matter of interpretation as to who attacked whom, Christy says. Again, I see the slight trace of a smile at the corner of her eyes as she stares at the twin black eyes left by Schmidt's forearm in front of my nose. My client was merely defending himself. In fact, he had to do it from his knees after he was punched by your vice president of marketing, Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt was acting on his own behalf. He was no longer employed by this firm. Oh, replies Bill. I assume you don't involve former employees in personnel board reviews. So Mr. Schmidt must have been working at this firm at the time of yesterday's meeting. Since Mr. Schmidt assaulted my client immediately after the meeting, I see no other way but to conclude that he was still on the payroll of this firm at the time of the assault. There remains the question of interpreting who attacked whom. Miss Evans, Bill objected. I personally witnessed Mr. Schmidt's attack. I would expect you to do nothing more than support your client, Christy says. I hope you're not accusing me, as a representative of the court, of inducing perjury? Besides, there is a second witness. A second witness? She says, surprised. Brad gets up and opens the door. Betty Higgins, Schmidt's administrative assistant who I spoke to yesterday, enters the room looking very timid. Bill holds out a chair to her. She gratefully accepts the chair. Mrs. Higgins, Bill addresses her, I want to assure you that you are not under oath. I just have a few questions for you, and I would appreciate honest answers. Betty nods. Were you standing next to me yesterday? At the entrance to conference room 15C? Yes, she says. Did you witness the altercation between Jake, Mr. Vickers, and your former boss, Mr. Schmidt? Continues Bill. Betty hesitates and looks first at Tom and then at Christy. Mrs. Higgins, I would personally appreciate it if you would tell the truth as you best remember it. There will be no negative consequences if you tell the truth, Christy assures her. Betty sighs, then looks at Bill again. Yes, I saw that. Can you describe what you saw? Betty looks first at me, then at Christy, and finally back at Bill. I suppress a grin because it was obvious to me that Bill had hurt her in some way. I've never known her to be in any way cooperative or obliging. Perhaps my opinion was somewhat biased, since I knew she was submissive to the scumbag. They, Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Vickers, started arguing, and then Mr. Schmidt just punched Mr. Vickers in the face, says Betty. Can you show me how? Interrupts Bill. Well, he used his forearm like this, she says, withdrawing her hand and pretending to punch Bill on the top of his nose. Thanks, Betty, Bill says. And then what happened? Well, Mr. Vickers fell down. That is, not all the way to the floor, but just to his knees. I could see he was stunned. Then Mr. Schmidt began to tell him terrible things about his wife, that is, Mr. Wicker's wife. There were a few swear words, but that's basically what Mr. Schmidt said. And then what happened? Asks Bill. Then Mr. Vickers somehow managed to hit him in the face with the back of his head. I didn't see him do it because he was still on one knee at that point. Mr. Schmidt was standing over him and taunting Mrs. Vickers. Mr. Schmidt was still threatening Mr. Vickers and swearing at him. That's when Mr. Vickers punched him. Mr. Vickers said something that I could hear and then turned to walk away. I turned around then and walked back to my desk. I wanted nothing more to do with what happened in the room. Thank you, Betty, Bill said soothingly. When you went back to your desk, Mr. Vickers and I showed up just a few minutes later? Betty nods. I think so. You two showed up shortly after I sat down at my desk. Did he ask you about his wife coming into Mr. Schmidt's office around noon on Tuesday? Yes, he did, she replies. I'm about to object to this line of questioning from my own attorney when he tells Betty that's all the questions he has for her. Bill turns to Christy. Is there anything you'd like to ask her? Christy looks at Tom, then at Bill, and shakes her head. She then thanks Betty and tells her she can get back to her duties. Then my lawyer, which came as a shock to me, briefly explains what happened at my house Friday night and that I was hospitalized over the weekend. Christy and Tom were shocked. Christy, being the attorney I was trained to be, came to her senses fairly quickly and stated that what happened at my house was irrelevant as it was a private matter and had nothing to do with the company. Bill claims that both Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Hinckley conspired against me, that they used company resources in an attempt to discredit me and commit felonies and subverted the very HR process to get me fired. Furthermore, Mr. Schmidt had admitted before witnesses the day before that he had done all of this using company resources and procedures in an attempt to gain control over Mr. Wicker's wife. Thus, what happened on Friday night, even though it was my private residence, was simply a continuation of the criminal and civil violations that are generated within the walls of this firm. Bill then adds that he thinks any judge would agree with that argument and allow the jury to hear all the testimony. Finally, Bill asks Christy how she thinks all of this will play out in the court of public opinion. Christy glances at Tom and asks that she and Mr. Weston be excused for a 10-minute recess. Once in the hallway, Bill asks, "Do you think they'll go for it?" asks Brad. "I don't see them having a choice. They know that if we go to court, the newspapers will trash it. That's not the kind of publicity a company like this needs. However, I don't think they'll settle for the full $10 million. After about 15 minutes, they both come back into the room looking grim. Christy looks at me. "Jake, I can offer you a maximum of $6 million. That's the most they'll agree to. And they also want you to sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement and a 2-year non-compete agreement like you offered." I look at Bill and smile. We really only needed the $5 million, and the non-compete clause didn't bother me personally. I nod back at Christy and smile, reaching across the table for her to agree. After a few words between Christy and Bill, who needed to meet to work out the details, Bill and I leave the conference room and head for the elevators. "Mr. Vickers?" I hear behind me. Bill and I turn around and see Betty Higgins rubbing her hands together nervously. "Betty?" I ask. "Is something wrong?" "Well," Betty says, "yes and no." "What is it, Betty?" "Is it about yesterday, when you asked me about Mrs. Vickers going into Mr. Schmidt's office?" The sudden angry look on my face made Betty take a step back. Bill took a small step toward her and said, "Go on, Mrs. Higgins. What did you want to say?" "Well," Betty said, not knowing how to continue, "I wasn't surprised that you asked me those questions, Mr. Vickers. But I was surprised by the one question you didn't ask." I look at her puzzled. "You didn't ask me how long Mrs. Vickers was in his office yesterday. She locked the door like I said, but she was only in there for a minute, maybe 2, no more. And when she came out, she looked very angry." I glanced at Bill, and he returned my gaze. Thank you for telling me about it, Betty. I'm sorry if I alarmed you, I tell her. Is there anything else you'd like to share? No, Mr. Vickers. Well, yes, I'm sorry that all of this happened to you. Thanks, Betty. I appreciate that. Bill and I watch as she turns and walks away. So? Asks me Bill. So what? Asks me. Yesterday, when you found out she'd gone into his office, I saw you finally give up, and I thought your heart had completely hardened against her. Now it's obvious that nothing happened in that office yesterday. Does that change anything? Asks Bill. I look at Bill for a very long time and then say, Not a damn thing, Bill. Not a damn thing. When I heard those tapes from Tuesday, it was over for me. I just hadn't realized it yet. At that moment, the elevator bell rang and the doors slid open. Bill and I stepped inside, and I watched the doors of yet another aspect of my life close for the last time. Thursday, 4:30 p.m. Once again, Bill and I are escorted into my wife's office. This time at their request, although truth be told, we would have asked for another appointment anyway. It was time to end this once and for all. I immediately notice that Susie looks much better than she did the day before, although she still has trouble looking me in the eye. After we sit down, Vicky says, Jake, Susie has withdrawn her petition for divorce. She admits. Vicky interrupts the conversation when Susie takes her hand. Jake, Susie says barely, but still raising her gaze to me. We have a lot to talk about. I have to tell you something that won't be easy. I've made some serious mistakes in this whole affair. I want to apologize to you. No. I need you to come home. I let out a very deep sigh. There's no easy way to say this to Susie. I can't do this anymore. I doubt I'll ever be able to forgive you, and I certainly can't come home. Vicky is shocked, but I notice that Susie seemed to have expected my response. We filed for divorce, Bill says, during a sudden lull, handing them copies of the lawsuit and the proposed settlement agreement. The settlement is straightforward. All assets that were contributed to the marriage by both parties will be preserved. All assets acquired during the marriage will be divided 50-50ths. There will be no lump sum settlement payments and no alimony. We understand that under Texas law, Miss Vickers will be entitled to 50% of all assets, but we believe there are special circumstances that require a special settlement. Neither party would be interested in having all the events of the past week come out in court. Jake, what happened? Says Vicky, stunned. Susie puts her hand on Vicky's arm to silence her. I realize that Susie still hasn't told her lawyer about any of the things she did with Schmidt. I've had enough. Vicky, I say in a caustic tone. Obviously, your own client hasn't told you what she was involved in, so let me give you a brief overview. I look at Susie, and she lowers her head and looks at her hands again. When I came home last Friday after being away for almost 2 weeks and the day before our anniversary, my wife seduced and tricked me into sitting in a chair, immobilizing me, and started cheating on me in front of my eyes. Vicky looks at me, then at her client, then back at me, her mouth seemingly ajar. I regained consciousness over the weekend in the hospital, alone. Oh my God, I heard Susie say, with a look of horror on her face. I ignored her, focusing on the lawyer. When I was released from the hospital, my wife put a restraining order on my house. I discovered that all of our money had been taken out of our accounts and all of my credit cards were listed as stolen. The next day, I was served with divorce papers and informed that my company wanted to fire me. Over the next 2 days, I gather enough evidence to completely destroy all the fabricated and fake evidence that has been gathered against me. As bad as this week has been, if nothing had happened, I would still be trying to save my marriage. Unfortunately, it didn't. The 4 of us met on Tuesday, and in just 24 hours, we were able to present enough evidence to cast doubt on both the affidavit and the photos. I realize that neither of you two can admit to this, but I know as well as you do that there are doubts brewing in your minds. In spite of these doubts, I learned that my wife left this office on Tuesday night, where she met my bitter adversary and amused herself with him in my bed in my house, as she had been amusing herself with him for the past few days. I first found out about it on Tuesday night. Every morning as I've sat here this week trying to convey to my wife that all these allegations are false, she's laughed at me. I look at Bill and nod. Bill reaches into his trusty briefcase and pulls out a cassette tape. This is a copy. It's a recording of Schmidt's phone call from my bedroom Tuesday night. I'll let you two listen to it at your leisure, but the gist of it is that Schmidt is planning to throw you a fun party this weekend. Of course, if you still want to do that, I suppose you could call him. I look at Susie. Tears are rolling down her cheeks. For the first time since I've known her, tears don't make me feel anything. I sigh. I've done enough damage for one day. Bill and I should have left, but I couldn't leave it at that. I need to tell you two more things, Susie. One, you need to take the test. Second, I will always love you, but I can't be with you anymore. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't understand how you could so easily believe I was cheating on you. I don't understand how you could betray me the way you did. I don't understand how you became so evil. I don't understand how you could continue to date Schmidt, even after you had suspicions that I may not have been cheating. Do you have so much revenge in your heart? A few nights ago, I sat in my hotel room thinking about all the questions that needed answers. I still have a lot of questions, but I don't care about the answers anymore. I think I finally understood the old saying, the one that says, dig 2 graves before you go out for revenge. Susie, you've buried us both. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry." I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.